Thank you for watching this video from the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue at Carleton University. This event is sponsored by the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue, CETD, and the Faculty of Public Affairs Research Month at Carleton University. CETD receives funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The views expressed in this video are solely those of the presenter and do not reflect the views of the CETD, SHRC, or Carleton University.
So welcome to our second to last panel, and we're now going to discuss challenges of democratic legitimacy, confronting citizen apathy, and the democratic deficit. And since we're running a little bit behind, I won't give an extended introduction. We'll just launch directly into our panel. We have 4 speakers, and we're going to cover this issue from a European perspective as well as a comparative perspective, looking at things like voter turnout, participations in referenda, electronic voting, and more generally issues of democratic participation. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Alex Trechsel, who's come to us from Florence, European University Institute. And thank you, Alex, for coming all this way, and the floor is yours. 15 minutes you have.
Thank you very much, Joan, for this very kind invitation. It's my second time at Carleton University. I'm very happy to be back and talk about the Europeanization of European democracy. Now, I'm interested in the question of European democracy, or rather EU democracy, and if there is such a thing as EU democracy. Now, most observers agree that if it exists, then it's rather limited in both substance and magnitude. And I will argue that even if this is the case, even if this was the case, we're witnessing signs of improvement from a normative, theoretical point of view, but also from an empirical point of view. And I will argue that the exercise of democracy in a continent-wide political space is in need of some common political concerns, which determines who wins and who loses politically. So let us first identify the loci where one would expect EU democracy to manifest itself. Where is EU democracy? Now, for one, EU democracy may penetrate, or Europe, let's say, may penetrate the party systems of the member states and their national elections, and therefore the electorate. But until recently at least, parties and party systems were said to remain pretty immune, at least that's what the late Peter Mayer said in an article in 2000, rather unaffected by European integration. But this may have changed, and we possibly do assist the Europeanization of national democracy. But is this enough? What's the shape that EU-level democracy is in? Do citizens directly take part in European integration? And do political actors win or lose on the grounds of Europe? Let's look at the mechanisms that Europe has at its disposal to bring in its citizens. Now, first, of course, there are the direct elections to the European Parliament since 1979. But citizens show rather low interest in these elections. And we'll see the shrinking figures of turnout, and we'll come back to the EP elections in a bit. And there are also new instruments of citizen participation. For example, the European Citizens Initiative. Larry is going to talk about that in a bit, but we can already anticipate it now. It's a rather lame instrument so far, I would say. And then some people will say, well, there are the referendums that were held regarding European integration. This is true, but a very small minority of treaty ratification is actually undertaken by referendum. Since the 80s, in only about 11% of all cases, where national ratifications of European treaties took place, only 11% of these cases we had actually a referendum. And also since the failed attempt of adopting the constitutional treaty 10 years ago, only one country, Ireland, held a referendum, or actually 2, on a step towards European integration. After that, the Danish referendum recently, and the Greek referendum, which was not really about European integration. And then we have the Brexit referendum coming up soon in the UK. But paradoxically, while both voters and parties seem to ignore European democracy, European integration has advanced strongly. And maybe even because of the absence of strong democratic participation by citizens, as these treaty-threatening referendums have shown. So what scholars usually label the period of the permissive consensus, when citizens simply tolerated further EU integration, may be an artifact, as citizens were simply not asked about their opinions. It's difficult to consensually permit something one did not ask you to express yourself about. Right? So in other words, referendums are only recent phenomena in European integration, and if you want to further the latter, then it's probably better limit the former, and this is what is now largely done. So this is not an ideal situation for democracy to work, because for democracy you arguably need citizens. And for European democracy, one ideally needs citizens that decide about the future of Europe based on European concerns. And for European democracy to be truly European, one has to identify concerns that resonate in a similar way from one corner of Europe to the other, and which affect both political competition and public opinion. And so for this, the only direct mechanism of citizen participation remains the European Parliament elections. But they are seen best as a series of national elections regarding national issues held at the same time. So generally, they are seen as so-called second-order events since the Reif-and-Schmidt contribution of 1980, where less is at stake than in national elections, where large governing parties are losing ground, where new small parties gain, where turnout is generally low, and where the competition concerns above all national politics. And there were several attempts to change this recently, some more successful than others. Yeah, but that's what I just said. Now, first, there was a creation of a European party system that is attempted and ongoing, with European parties as drivers. But really that didn't work very well either until now. Second, there is Andrew Duff, an MEP, former MEP, UK Liberal Party, who proposed the creation of a transnational constituency for at least a part of the European Parliament, so that voters in Ireland could vote about for parties in Slovakia, and Finnish and voters could choose parties in Italy, etc. But that didn't really work out so far either. And then third, there's the Spitzenkandidaten attempt, which was implemented on the legal basis that was offered by the Treaty of Lisbon, and thanks to political will by the largest parties, were willing to play this game of this Spitzenkandidaten for the Commission presidency. But we can already say that now. The Spitzenkandidaten plan did not really work either. This presidentialization that was expected of the European electoral system did not really have the anticipated impact in the elections. Let me be a little bit more precise. The Spitzenkandidaten campaigns did have an impact on turnout, but only for those who actually recognized at least one of the top candidates, which were either Martin Schulz or Jean-Claude Juncker. And this precisely is what didn't work, because only 19% in the survey, that was published by Schmidt and Hobolt and Popa, only 19% of all survey people heard about or could recognize Juncker, and only 17% Schulz. So in sum, the institutional approaches of Europeanizing European democracy pretty much failed so far. Now, I would argue that there was an exogenous shock that took place, and of course it's the economic and financial crisis, and this exogenous shock may have changed things a little bit. As many preceding crises, this crisis too had very strong repercussions on European integration. On the one hand, of course, it was massively weakening the project of a united Europe. The euro crisis has almost led to the dissolution of the Union, and the threat, to be really honest, is not just over yet. But on the other hand, there's also a strong integration push that came thanks to this crisis. We have these 2-pack, 6-pack, fiscal compact, banking union, etc. Massive advances in European integration that took place at the same time because of the crisis. Now, you can add to this that Europe has become an item that affects really parties and voters, and it does so at the national level, and it does so at the European level. So if you want to put it provocatively here, what the great European thinkers, leaders, and policymakers have failed to achieve, rather reckless bankers, I would say, first in the US and then in the rest of the world, have successfully, though involuntarily, achieved. So let me quickly talk a little bit about empirical research that we're conducting, and that is going in the direction of this hypothesis of a Europeanization of European democracy. This is work we're doing together with Diego Garcia at the EUI and with Lorenzo De Sio from LUIS in Rome. And we decided to look very closely at the results of the 2009-2014 EP elections. And I'm not going to bother you with regression coefficients and marginal effects graphs, etc. But I'm just summing up what we found. So we basically looked at gains and losses by parties in these two European elections. And in our framework, winning means getting higher electoral returns in EP elections than in the preceding national elections. So that, of course, the inverse is true for losing the EP elections. Example, the Front National wins more in EP elections than in national elections. It profits from the EP elections. But the inverse is true, say, for the socialists in France. In 2014, they lost votes quite dramatically in the EP elections compared to the last national elections. So we now distinguish also in our research between East and West. That's commonly done in empirical work on public opinion and party systems in Europe, because these are two very different contexts. And what we find here is that in the West, first, the second-order character of these elections has not really changed much. It gets slightly weaker in 2014, but it's still clearly there. The large parties and the governing parties tend to lose in these European elections. And in Eastern Europe, however, this is different. There we don't find that effect at all. There is no second-order model that you could apply to Eastern and Central Europe. So the first conclusion is that, above all, this second-order model is a Western phenomenon, with political parties in the new European member states seemingly to be seen to be rather immune to this model. Now, thanks to additional data from two very large projects from the 2009-2014 elections, voting advice applications, one called the EU Profile, the other called the EU and I project, we got a very unique data set of issues and of the issue space in Europe on which parties competed in these two European elections. As I mentioned, these were two voting advice applications that gave us the opportunity to measure the stances of the parties on a long series of issues. 270 parties, 74 parties were coded in 2009, and 242 were coded in 2014. And so we got very detailed information on party stances on these 30 issues in 2009, 2014 for each election, and 17 of these statements were common to 2009, 2014. So this allows us to measure the impact of these issues across time. And what we find here, again, are two results that we find quite interesting, but that are very similar across the EU this time. First, when we take the issues on which parties compete into account, we can much better predict the outcome of the elections. So unlike in a baseline model, we wouldn't take care of we wouldn't include the issues. We just look at size of parties, governing, non-governing, et cetera, the usual suspects. And then we add the issue stances to see whether this made them gain votes or lose votes. And when we do that, the overall explanatory power of our model becomes much stronger. And that was the case in 2009, but in 2014 it became even more so the case. So we think that we start seeing a space, a political space that contains issues on which parties throughout Europe compete independently from their national origins. And our second result here is even more surprising. Basically in 2014, and this contrary to 2009, out of a long series of issues, it was European integration that stands out. It is the only issue that matters across the board, both in the West and in the East. So depending on your position vis-a-vis European integration, a party would lose or win in these elections across the board, right? And there is, however, a big nuance to make, because in the West, it's the parties that wanted to stop or even reverse integration that came out winning in these elections. And in the East, it was the inverse that was the case. In the East, it was a pro-integration attitude that was actually welcomed by the voters, leading to better electoral outcomes for those parties championing this policy issue. So let me conclude. First, the results show that the second-order character of European elections is mainly a Western European phenomenon. In Eastern Europe, being small or big, being in government or not, does not really affect the probability of winning or losing the elections. What does affect the probability of you winning or losing the elections, however, is this, and this is our second and most novel result, is that taking a stance on European integration in general does matter. It matters so as the only issue in both East and West. And this is, I guess, good news to democracy in Europe, because although European integration does not resonate the same way in the East and in the West, it is a driving force of electoral outcomes at European level. And so from a purely democratic, normative, theoretical point of view, we have, for the first time, I'd argue, in 2014, an interplay between parties and voters in Europe where EU integration actually makes a difference. So European elections have, in a sense, truly Europeanized. Now the question arises: is this also good for European integration? It might be good for European democracy, but for European integration, that's a different question. And probably I would say not so, because at least not in the old Europe, where integration becomes almost a liability to parties. And we have a situation, in a sense, in which European integration has become the Obama of Democrats in the 2014 US congressional elections, and we're trying to mobilize voters by reference to Obama actually punished the Democrats, right? And in Eastern Europe, however, we have the 2010 situation in the congressional elections where Obama was an asset in the midterm elections. So this gets us back to the issue of direct participation of citizens by the European integration process. I think, as with referendums, it can go wrong from the perspective of furthering integration. And at the same time, however, I think we made progress to higher levels of democratic legitimation of integration across all of Europe. We have now a synchronization of salient pan-European issues. The Europeanization of European elections, therefore, clearly took place. And I think, and I'll close with this, that with the ongoing immigration crisis, which is by far the most important issue right now in Europe, I think I would suspect that 2019, European elections of 2019 might become even more Europeanized than the ones in 2014. Thank you for your attention.